Hello, hello, hello. Welcome one, welcome all. Thank you for tuning in to Hail Yes, the Detroit Free Press podcast about University of Michigan athletics. I'm Tony Garcia, Michigan beat writer for The Freak, joined by Reiner Sabin, our Big Ten insider, who covers both Michigan and Michigan State for us. And Reiner, I'm now very happy. It's week 3, and I'm happy because that means the non-conference season is about to get over and Big Ten slate is here. However, you will be attending, as we just mentioned, our Big Ten insider. You have a big matchup this weekend in a number of ways. Michigan State, Washington is where you will be, correct?
I will be there. Actually see a Power 5 opponent play one of the Michigan teams. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, who knew that could happen in September outside the conference? And then, however, just so everybody's aware, we were just discussing how you're going to record and watch the Michigan game right after. So we'll have plenty to talk about the next time we record next Monday. But for now,
if I'm still alive, if I'm still alive, yeah,
right. Yeah. That's going to be your second very aggressive turn in 3 weeks. How do you feel about that?
It's rough. I had to do the Central Michigan game Friday on week 1, and then turn around to do the Michigan East Carolina game. Felt like 5 hours afterwards. But yeah, so I'm getting used to it. I should be run down by week 4.
Yeah. I was gonna say everyone has their small violins playing. I'm sure sympathies are pouring in from all across the country for you. Thoughts and prayers, certainly. But all right, here's what we're gonna do. As always, we start out with 3 thoughts. And now that we have a little bit of sample size, we're going to look at each of us have identified someone who has positively surprised us, somebody who has perhaps not quite lived up to the expectations we expected. And then our third thought is just lessons from last season, things they did last season or things maybe they didn't do last year, and sort of how they're applying it this season and what we think of that. On the other side of the break, it's obviously Bowling Green week. Michigan is favored by 40, count them 40 and a half points. So nobody is expecting this to be much test, but there's still a game. There's still plenty to learn about, and actually a lot of interesting connections between Michigan and Bowling Green that we're going to get into. And then in section 3, I don't want to call it our favorite section because we like it all, but we do enjoy the picks, even though none of us have a winning record. That's when we bring in our man, Andrew Burkle, as well, for section 3 and the picks, as one of us tries to get out of the negative. But we're starting this episode on a positive note because a lot of things are happening positively around the Michigan football program, number 2 in the nation at 2-0. Reiner, who has positively surprised you? Which player has positively surprised you the most to start the 2023 season?
I mean, I would have to say Roman Wilson from, just week 1 to, through week 2. I mean, it was just, such a difference maker in the passing game. And he's been at times, very dynamic, going into the season. Much was made of the fact that the receiver group didn't have anybody listed on one of the preseason award watch lists, like so many of the other players at all the other position groups. And, that was kind of conspicuous by their absence was the receiver group. And, here's a guy who, has kind of been in the program for a while, has flashed at times, but just has never quite put it together from one week to the next, maybe. Now you're seeing this is the third really good performance in a row, going back to the college football playoff game against TCU. And, he's just, been a number 1 type of receiver for J.J. McCarthy, which is also was a question mark going into the season. Would they have a go-to receiver, and who is going to be that guy? And clearly Roman Wilson has raised his hand there.
It was one of my number 1 questions, to be certain. And when Jim Harbaugh gave him the number 1 jersey in fall camp, I won't lie, I was skeptical, and I was wondering if it was perhaps, if nothing else, a move to instill confidence. Just because, Roman Wilson is extremely talented, right? He did not sure, he got slightly stronger, perhaps a little faster, but he didn't become some quick twitch athletic freak overnight. He has long been an incredible speedy receiver, and it was just about opportunity and things sort of lining up. And so maybe it was confidence. I'm not sure what it was that that finally clicked, as well as, again, like we said, opportunity. But man, whether or not the competition has been a tick down, this does not feel like any sort of fluke, or like it's because of the fact that they're in the non-power five. I mean, now I'm not expecting him to have 2 to 3 touchdowns every single game, obviously. However, for him to be that reliable guy for JJ McCarthy, I mean, he certainly seems to be the one he's looking for.
Well, and the one question, again, they haven't really thrown deep. And last year, I mean, they were just off on a couple throws last year that were thrown deep. If I recall, the one against Iowa really stood out, I think, where he was streaking and almost, I think, running a post pattern and, just missed. And that was an issue last year, too, where, JJ just seemed like they were out of rhythm at times, especially in the deep passing game. We haven't really seen much of the deep passing game, so that's like the last thing that needs to be checked off, essentially. But, assuming that, Roman Wilson is going to be targeted on those plays, I have a feeling that he's going to deliver, because, again, that was slightly resolved by the end of last season. I mean, again, the play that was controversial with the no touchdown that led to the fumble against TCU. I mean, that was a deep shot too, and Roman Wilson was the guy there. So I would think you'll see him running those patterns deep and being that guy for JJ McCarthy as well.
Right, and even though the deep passing game has not quite hit, the intermediate passing game certainly has. Mm-hmm. And that they didn't even have that last year, right? Like it was 5 and 10 yard passes as opposed to 10 and 15. Tons of, Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson between them, I think, have 15 plays between 12 and 18 yards. It's just very consistent chunk plays, and they've done it a ton. So the person I'm looking at for my positive surprise on the other side of the ball, and there's a couple people I could have chosen in this exact position group, but I went with Kenneth Grant. And I was debating Mason Graham as well. Both sophomore defensive tackles who have been tremendous through 2 weeks. But I went with KG because, frankly, Mason was a little bit ahead of him last season. And I think so far this year, Kenneth Grant has been just about every bit as disruptive. He had 4 tackles last weekend. 2.5 were for loss. 1.5 of those was a sack. He batted a ball at the line of scrimmage. The week before, he batted a ball at the line of scrimmage, and it led to Mike Sainristil's interception. Today, defensive line coach Mike Elston was really sort of detailing just he said he's still scratching the surface, which really makes you wonder where he can get to. But he was just talking. Of course, he's 335, 340 pounds, but he's got those. I think Mike did a great job explaining. He's got those big, long arms. And when you line him up on the interior, he's lined up over a center or a guard, he can extend, right? And interior linemen who have shorter arms are just not built to be able to maintain that block. So he can block, destruct, one of Jesse Minter's 4 pillars, and wrap up. And you've seen him do that tremendously through 2 weeks.
Yeah, this is kind of a year in the making. Jim Harbaugh said back in, I think it was July of 2022, that Kenneth Grant was the gift from the football gods. So that led to the hype, before his, even played his first snap at the college level. And then, the spring, there was a lot of talk about him kind of, stepping up, obviously with Mozzie Smith being gone, whether, how much of an impact could he possibly make? He said, I think all eyes are on me. And so sure enough, he's kind of, I guess, lived up to the expectations that everybody kind of had for him going back a year. And it's just kind of, now coming to fruition for him. But again, it's a matter of opportunity and, him getting integrated into the system. Seemed like Mason Graham was obviously on a faster track, was able to kind of be counted on earlier in his career than Kenneth Grant. But now Grant might have the, better upside. Who knows? Now that he's, in the fold and has actually, really kind of taken on a new level as far as just being able to kind of affect the quarterback from the, the inside position, the zero position.
Right. Well, the upside is a good question, and I guess it's sort of it's a beauty is in the eye of the beholder sort of thing. It depends. I would maybe imagine, at least right now, in what you need, because as Elston was explaining, just in as what we keep saying, Mason slightly farther along in his development, they are willing to line him up not just in the zero, like as you said, 0 or 1 or 2 technique, which is over the guard, but they will get him 3 tech outside, like on the tackle shoulder, or even outside the tackle. Whereas Kenneth Grant, they're not taking him outside the guard. So.
Right.
So it's a good question. I don't know, because I think both of these players have such incredibly high ceilings. It's tough to tell, and it's one of those. It's like picking a Bosa, right? I mean, you're you're ending up with a really great player either way. And I just one more story about Kenneth Grant was one of the 2 players who Jim Harbaugh called a gift to the football gods. And yesterday, I should say. Right now we're recording on Wednesday. So Tuesday evening, Mason Graham was one of the players we spoke with at Schembechler Hall. And I just wanted to ask him, because I didn't know if anyone had asked him this question. Did you know that Jim Harbaugh was talking about you when he said this thing about the gift of the football gods? And Mason said he did not know until this spring, May. He's like, I'd always heard something about gift from the football gods, but he's like, I never really paid attention to it, and he didn't know that he was one of them. So he thought that was cool. But as good as the interior of the defensive line has been, and I think this next player is still a pretty good player, there is someone who I think was on your quote unquote disappointing list.
Yeah, just disappointed because, he was so hyped before the season, and that would be Chris Jenkins. He hasn't made as visible of an impact as, say, Kenneth Grant and really Mason Graham, and he plays the same position. And again, he was talked about as being this like incredible playmaker, top end of the first round type talent, potentially. They thought that he could bust into that level as far as the NFL draft. And, again, it's very early on in the season, but just that real measurable impact, that visible impact, I haven't seen. He doesn't stand out from a down to down, whereas like Kenneth Grant really has caught my eye, and like, Mason Graham has caught my eye. And it feels like they're in on a lot of these plays more so than even Chris Jenkins. And so it's not even like he's a disappointment in that it's just been, unproductive and there's nothing there. It's just the fact that he was so hyped going into the season, on the freaks list and so on and so forth with Bruce Feldman's, athletic list or whatever. And it just, there's a lot of talk about him in the months leading up to this year.
Right. Relative to expectation. Certainly I can see that, but I don't think you're off. You're not selling Chris Jenkins stock. Is that correct?
No, absolutely not. I just, I haven't seen. Yeah,
I'm going to buy it. I'm going to buy it up if you're selling low.
No. I'm not. I'm not doing that. What I'm saying is that, like, when somebody's that, hyped and has those kind of expectations, you expect them to make a huge impact, especially against lower level competition like UNLV and East Carolina. Right. And he hasn't done that. Yeah.
Yeah. And he is someone who didn't even have a chance to be on the positive surprise list, right? Because there's nothing he could do that would surprise us. So just for what it's worth, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But no, to be sure, I think we both probably expected the numbers to be a little better for Chris Jenkins, even though last year, I mean, and from the interior defensive line position, it is not a stat producing position, right? It is a block eating position to let the linebackers clean up. But to your point, KG, Mason have still been more productive from the exact same spot.
Yeah, and he was supposed to be a big part of the pass rush. I mean, and you can make an argument.
He said he wanted 10 sacks.
Yeah, you can make an argument that again, Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham have been better from creating pressure than Chris Jenkins has. I think that is borne out statistically too.
Yeah, and he did get it home on a sack last week, at least a share of one.
Right.
The guy I'm looking at, we've mentioned him on a number of podcasts thus far. It's Donovan Edwards, the running game that still has not quite gotten going for Michigan, but it's going at certainly different levels when Blake Corum is running the ball versus when Donovan Edwards is running the ball. Blake Corum, 10 carries for 72 the first week, 15 carries for 80 the next week. So that's 7 yards a touch and then 5.5 or so far this year. Donovan Edwards, 18 rushes, 46 yards. That's 2.5 yards per carry. And I mean, the real concern is outside of one rush of 14 yards, he has 1 for 14 and 1 for 11. His other 16 rushes have gone for 25 yards. I mean, it's just, or excuse me, that was bad math. Have gone for 21 yards. And so, and it's not, and while the numbers are tough by themselves, it's if you like actually look at whether it's a zone run, whether it's a gap run, whether he's going in between the tackles, outside the tackles. I mean, it's getting shut down pretty much every which way. So when he's running outside, like even the tight ends, right end or left end, he has been at his best. 10 of his carries for 30 of his yards. But the other 8 carries in between the tackles are just for, and so he's averaging 3 yards a carry on those. And on the other 8 carries for in between the tackles, 16 yards, 2 yards a pop. So yes, of course they are using him in the passing game, but even there, he's been somewhat limited. He has 9 receptions, but not even quite 60 yards. And so just for such an explosive player to have on the order of nearly 30 touches and not much more than 100 all-purpose yards is really surprising to me.
Yeah. And, we asked Aaron more about it, and, he didn't sound like he was too concerned about that. But I mean, of course, what is he going to say? I mean, and, he kind of, I asked him if, Donovan's more of a one-cut runner. And the reason why I asked that was because, again, Donovan has mentioned trying to co-opt aspects of Corum's game, and Corum's game is a little bit more of wiggle and being able to get out of tight quarters and break loose that way. And that really isn't Donovan Edwards' game. I mean, Donovan Edwards seems more of like a one cut, boom, he's going to hit the hole. Hit the hole and run. And he's more of a straight line runner. He doesn't have that elusive wiggle that Blake Corum. He's not the same back. And so I asked him about whether, he could do, that's how he should be viewed as a one cut. And, Sherman Moore disagreed and said he can do both. But I think, if you watch some of the runs that Donovan Edwards has, it looks like he's trying to, find that perfect hole and, maybe wiggle out of things instead of just, hitting, the hole, or whatever crease that opens up instantly and bursting through that. And I think there's some tentativeness there because he's looking to do some of the Corum stuff that he does to kind of, break those long runs.
Yeah, there might be some of that. And I wrote before week 2, after week 1, I liked at least the things that Donovan was telling me. Because it really seemed like just educationally he was understanding. He was saying how a big part of his growth in the maturation process this year is not trying to do too much, understanding you do not have to hit the home run every time, but accepting what the defense is giving you. And I thought that was a good sign after week 1 where he was, I guess, somewhat humbled by East Carolina keeping them in the box. And he had said it. He's like, look, like eventually there's only so much you can do. You just got to protect the ball, fall forward, and get down. And I thought that was a good sign. But then against UNLV, to your point, it did feel like he was trying to do a little too much, waiting for things to open up or for this magical lane. And now there is a little bit of bad luck, right? I equate it to a starting pitcher in the major leagues, the guy in the majors who just doesn't get the run support that year. There's always one guy who gets no run support, right? On some of these runs, it feels like Donovan has had nowhere to go. Right? Like there just hasn't been anything he could do. And there's not enough sample to offset, there's not enough carries to offset that yet. So it's both, but I did have him on my disappointment list, not just because of that.
I agree with that. I mean, wholeheartedly. And, the other thing is even in space, he's been tackled pretty quickly. I mean, it's not like he's taking advantage. I mean, there are a few times that he has been able to get out in his space. He's been tracked down pretty quickly. And I don't know what that's all about. And it seems strange considering, he was so good, when he was out freely and basically was one-on-one with the defender, but or there was a defender chasing him from behind and just couldn't catch up to him. And this time it seems like they're having a little bit better shot at catching up to him. So before he even gets going and picks up the major gain or whatever. So yeah, I think it's a little bit concerning for sure, and certainly he would qualify as a disappointment so far.
I think we're on the same page there. And then I guess we'll just move that into our third thought, which is sort of building on sort of lessons from last year into this year. Like you alluded to Donovan Edwards trying to bring some of Blake Corum's game into his own, right? So every offseason, you look at what you did well last year, what you didn't do, how you can improve, and all those sorts of things. And so I guess now is as good a time to sort of look at those as any, to start seeing how much improvement Michigan has or hasn't made. And one of the places that stood out to you, Reiner, I guess, was play action.
Yeah, I think they've picked up where they left off last year. Play action was very effective for them last season. This year, JJ's 12 for 12 for 219 yards and the 47-yard touchdown to Roman Wilson against UNLV off play action. Obviously, that's largely affected by how strong your run game is. And while the run game has been a little bit weaker, it's pretty interesting that the play action pass has almost been more effective. So, I mean, teams still are honoring the run. I mean, Jim Harbaugh alluded to that, where it seems like, the linebackers are already at the kind of line of scrimmage, essentially, when after the ball snap and, JJ's dropping back. So, I mean, that creates a lot of yardage underneath, and also at the second and third levels too. So, that's something that really tried to tap into. They studied it all off season, and they looked at the Lions play action, and obviously the Lions have done a lot with their run game, using it as the basis of their entire offense and playing off of that. And so they're a good team to study for that. And again, they've really Michigan's made it a focus of their offseason to improve that aspect, and so far it's bearing fruit.
Yeah, that intermediate passing game that we were talking about earlier, right? When the linebackers come down and the safeties are still up, and just there's a large window there. But I'm glad what you said about how Michigan was successful last year with the play action, because a lot of people are, maybe I'm misreading it or mishearing it, but I've heard a lot of questions and a lot of talk around the play action game. And people are talking like, I mean, obviously it has been phenomenal and flawless this year, but people are acting like it just came out of nowhere. JJ McCarthy averaged more yards per pass per attempt on play action passes than any quarterback in the nation last year. So this was the way Michigan got shots downfield. It was how they picked up chunk plays in the passing game. So that's not changed. It's just improved, at least in my mind. And another thing that I saw that I think you maybe don't quite agree with in terms of a change or balancing how things happened last year and sort of reacting to it this year, also in relation to the passing game, is the way they're using their tight ends. We talked to Grant Newsome, the tight ends coach, today, and he was just talking about how last year he felt he used Luke Schoonmaker too frequently. That is what wore him down, why he ended up getting hurt. In some ways, the numbers do bear that out. So starting at the Maryland game, so the first 3 games of the year, Eric also played. So Luke Schoonmaker was sort of that second tight end. He was more the blocking tight end, where AJ Barner's playing this year. But once Eric All went out, Schoonmaker translated more over to that Y tight end, the primary. And from then, starting at Maryland, he had 52, 61, 67, 71, and 74 snaps. Then at Rutgers, he had 52. I believe that's where he got hurt. He missed a game against Nebraska, a game against Illinois, and then sort of wore down, never played more than 45 snaps again the rest of the year. And that is That is, I think that's part of the reason. Maybe the competition certainly has to do with the reason that the tight end snaps have been spread out. But Grant Newsome today said it's one of his regrets from last year, sort of running Scooney, as he called him, into the ground, and he just wants to be a little more conscious about that this season.
I mean, I agree to some extent. I mean, you obviously want to, lower the snap count because, I mean, it's a tough position to play. However, I mean, that was circumstantial with Schoonmaker. I mean, Eric All was out, after week 3. I think, or maybe even starting week 3, if I recall correctly. And then also, the fact is that they were having to try to integrate, Colston Loveland more. He was a freshman. And you can see that they were really confident in his blocking ability at all. And then still, I don't know if they're totally confident in it, to be honest with you right now, which is hence why you have Barner. And so, I think part of the tight end usage is because of what each can do differently. I think they all bring different skill set, and they are used accordingly. And the fact is that, Michigan still likes to run the ball a lot. So you're probably going to see a lot of A.J. Barner, which is why he has a higher snap count than, say, Colston Loveland, even though Colston Loveland probably has a much bigger upside than, obviously, A.J. Barner as a tight end. So, I mean, I think that some of it has to do with scheme and what they really want to accomplish offensively. And so I think that's as much to do as whether they want to, kind of lower the snap count to preserve health over the course of the season.
You're right. And Newsome said as much. I mean, he said it's personnel based and situation based, right? Like technically week 1, Max Bredesen was the starter. Why?
Right.
Because Michigan was backed up on its own end zone. They needed him to line up as the H-back. And so he's the starter. But Max Bredesen is the third tight end on the depth chart if you were actually going in order. Or second behind one of them at a spot. So your point remains, but I just thought it was interesting when there's so little that we can take from these games, Reiner. I look for little nuggets, little just things to sort of pocket and take away and remember for later. That's one that I'm gonna just file away.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable. I mean, again, there's a reason why a lot of these teams use the catapult system, to monitor practice and how much, people are, workloads, and they scale it back. I mean, Saban did that at Alabama, wrote a whole story about that, actually, just how they've used that system, not only for just monitoring energy towards the end of the season, but also just injury recovery and being able to get back on the field quickly.
Did you just plug a piece of yours from 5 years ago at your Alabama paper?
Yep, it's true. Yes, I did. Yep, and it's a good piece. It actually won an award. So there you go.
That a boy, company man.
Yep, exactly. Right. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Have you won an award for us yet?
Yes, I did. My first year I was here, so not national. It was local. So yeah.
we'll still take it. That's why we keep you around. All right, Reiner. Yeah. That'll wrap up the first part. On the other side, it is Bowling Green week, so we do need to talk a little bit about the opponent. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Hail Yes. Welcome back. All right, week 3, Bowling Green is on the schedule. Bowling Green, Reiner, did you know, is where all Chevrolet Corvettes have been built since 1981.
I did not know that. I did not. I mean, I've seen the stadium when you are going along 23, and it's about my extent of Bowling Green knowledge.
Well, I hope you know a little bit more about that, because Michigan is about to play the Falcons, the 1-1 Falcons, and I do know you know slightly more than that. Even if you'd like to let us on. I also looked up another fun fact. So why is it called Bowling Green? It was settled in 1780 by Robert and George Moore, and tradition suggests that their sport of bowling wooden balls across the green gave the city its name. I don't know which green, but that's what it said.
Also, a Michigan favorite, Urban Meyer, coached there once upon a time.
There are a ton of ties. I guess that's actually as good a jumping off point as any. Is the number of Michigan ties to Bowling Green, it's phenomenal. Of course, Jim Harbaugh's father, Jack, he went to school there. It's where Jack met Jim's mother, Jackie, in an English class, is what Jim told us. He said they were just pulling out old photos of Jack in his 13 jersey with his mom as a cheerleader behind him. That would be pretty awesome. There's no doubt to see. When Jack went back to coach as an assistant when Jim was 4, 5, 6 years old for a couple years. And that's just the beginning. So Scott Leffler, the coach for Bowling Green, a former Michigan quarterback, right? And what I found out today, Reiner, did you know that he was roommates with Mike Elston, the Michigan's defensive line coach?
I did not know that. That was interesting, and so yeah, there are some deep ties there. But it makes sense. I mean, the proximity of Bowling Green to Ann Arbor. I mean, it's about an hour away, so I mean, it's not that not that crazy.
Yeah. Mac has long been. I mean, Bo Schembechler has long been a stepping stone conference into the Big Ten.
Absolutely,
you see that. In other places on this staff, like Steve Morrison, the co-defensive coordinator for Bowling Green. He was also on the team at Michigan with Elston, with Leffler in the 90s. He's from Birmingham, Michigan. He got it. I was looking into him a little bit. He got to start at Brother Rice Rice High School.
I'll never forget Steve Morrison because if I recall correctly, he was right down at the end of the field when Cordell Stewart threw the miraculous touchdown to beat Michigan at the end of the game. So I remember that specifically. I remember his jersey. I think it was 36. Yeah.
Yeah. No. While you look into that, I was 1 year old. If that was 94, was it 94?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because I was 1, so I do not recall. That is slightly before my Michigan football recollection. But just to round out the Steve Morrison point, I mean, he had stopped at Western and Eastern. He's been at Michigan as well. So and then Eric Campbell, he's the passing game coordinator and the wide receivers coach for Bowling Green. He coached at Michigan from 95 to 2007. He was the one who recruited Braylon Edwards, so pretty important person there. And he came back as the recruiting coordinator for Jim Harbaugh's first year in 2015. So, I mean, listen to all of those ties. It's actually nuts.
Mm-hmm. And I was right. It was 36 that his number was, Steve Morrison. So,
good for you. Good for you. Okay. Yeah. And in case we're going to keep this theme going with all these ties to these programs, Reiner, the quarterback of Bowling Green is Connor Bazelak from Missouri, went to Indiana. And of course, by going to Indiana, he was at Indiana last year. Not only did he start the game against Michigan, but his understudy, Jack Tuttle, a captain, is now on Michigan's roster, as was AJ Barner, who I think it was a game against Idaho or Wyoming. They're slightly interchangeable in my mind. I apologize. That Bazelak actually threw Barner a touchdown against. So AJ was saying he's excited to see his old buddy, but Michigan should. There's nothing Connor Bazelak should be able to catch Michigan by surprise.
No, I don't think so. I mean, again, Michigan has not faced really any kind of deep shots from any of the quarterbacks. It doesn't look like Connor Bazelak is going to be able to do that either. I think he's 0 for 7 with one interception on passes of 20 yards or more. So, I mean, it's, a case where, again, I don't know how much he realistically could challenge them. He wasn't able to challenge them, obviously, against Indiana. He's coming in with a arguably much weaker team against Michigan, so I don't see how that passing game is really going to threaten Michigan. I don't see how Connor Bazelak is going to threaten Michigan at all. So I mean, Scott Leffler is going to have to come up with some amazing scheme, to basically flummox the Michigan, because again, it's about the Jimmies and the Joes versus the X's and the O's, and I don't think it's going to end up in Bowling Green's favor at all at any point, even in the game. Yeah.
Even though Michigan will not have its gym, they have plenty of Joes this week. Wow, that was a terrible joke. But certainly Connor Bazelak. I mean, he was on a more talented team last year, and it was far from enough. 25 of 49 for 203 yards. That is an average of 4.1 yards per pass. Reiner, this was my first game as taking over on the beat down in Bloomington, so it is ingrained, seared into my mind. Screen pass, bubble, screen. I mean, nothing downfield. They never tested anything, and it's why Michigan's defense in the second half, I mean, just completely shut everything down. I think 150 of those yards of the 200 must have been in the first half. I'd be surprised if he had more than 50. After the break.
Yeah, they were having some success with mixing up the formations, and I think
early with tempo, which has given Michigan problems for years.
Right,
but short of that, nothing.
Nothing. That was it, and it'll be interesting to see how Michigan has really, going forward, does handle tempo against really quality teams, because I think that they've gotten better at that since again. Look at Michigan State in 2021. That game was a perfect example of them using tempo to mess up Michigan, and Indiana was trying to do the same thing in that game. And they were able to adjust Michigan over the course of the game. And I think going forward, I don't think that's going to be as much of an issue. Especially as this defense becomes more and more ingrained in the program.
Yeah, well said. And in case, just for a final point on Connor Bazelak, I mean, he's also incredibly inconsistent, even this year. I mean, He was benched week 1 against Liberty when he was just not good. No touchdowns, 3 picks, less than 100 yards, 50% completion percentage. I mean, just awful. Last week against Eastern Illinois, much better, 3 touchdowns, no turnovers, in a 38-15 win. And he does actually have some decent pieces around him. Some of them have some names that are, in my mind, difficult to pronounce. So I think it's Adu Hilaire, the top wide receiver. He had 8 catches for 97 yards and a score each week. Teron Keith, the running back, he can run it. He can catch it out of the backfield, 120 receiving yards. And Harold Fannin Jr., their tight end. So they have someone in the running back core, in the tight end room, in the wide receiver room, who Michigan does need to be aware of. As Michigan's coaches have done, I mean, they do think highly of Scott Loeffler and his concepts, his schemes, which Mike Elston said were a little less "quote unquote" gimmicky than the few he's seen the first week in East Carolina and UNLV.
Yeah, I mean, again, Loeffler's been around a long time. He's obviously familiar with Michigan's roster, just by proximity and connections to the program. And so I'm sure he'll be able to come up with some stuff, just given the familiarity that he has with the Wolverines and his alma mater. But I just don't think, based on the talent level, it's just going to be a fair fight at all. It's just going to be kind of a rehash of the first 2 games where, again, the defense is just able to limit things because, again, the opposing offense is limited in themselves. So they're not going to be tested again, and it allows the defense to play less honestly and focus, and be able to kind of concentrate things, in the first and second levels and their focus, because they're not really threading deep. And so I would expect to see some more heavy pass rush and, Michigan defensive linemen getting home and creating trouble for Bazelak.
I do foresee that as well. Whether that's enough to cover the spread, or if you and I think it is, we will find out on the other side of the break when we bring in our producer and sports editor, Andrew Burkle, to help us sort all that out. So one last little bit of set of bills to pay. Don't go away, because we'll give us some picks on the other side. You're listening to Hail Yes. As promised, we are back with the picks, but Reiner and I cannot do it alone. We need our trusty right-hand man, Andrew Burkle himself. What's going on, Andrew?
Oh, not too much. Busy week so far. Just as I've told you guys that we just finally had an offer on a house accepted. So that was hard getting done, but now a lot of other steps from here on out. So busy week, but ready to make some college football picks and redeem myself. I've had an awful record after talking all kinds of crap before the season even started.
I was going to say, quite literally, a 5-year-old could do what you're doing, Andrew. Just randomly, blindly picking Andrew at 2-5 on the season. Reiner and I only one game better, each 3-4.
Can you hop off your high horse for a second there? But
I didn't gas myself up. I didn't gas myself up though. That's the thing. I said I was terrible, and I was honest with the people from the beginning. You said you were going to lap me. That's the distinction, my friend. But let's see if we can let's all get some wins this week. What do you say?
It sounds like a plan. And from what I can tell here, based on some pre podcast conversations, we might be heading in some similar directions here. So, all right, well, we'll start with you, Tony. Bowling Green and Michigan. Obviously, this is a Michigan podcast. We're going to pick the Wolverines game. 40.5 points. Tony, which direction are you going with this one here?
Yeah, I picked Michigan to cover the spread each of the first 2 weeks. Obviously, they did that in neither. And it's just hard. The spread is even larger this week. It's just hard to see. I mean, Michigan's yet to score 40 points in the game, right? They haven't scored more than 35, and they need 41, and that's if they get the shutout. And Bowling Green, I think, is at least at the level of UNLV thereabout. I just don't think there's enough time. Could Michigan, if they wanted to, win this game by 42 points? Yeah, but the way they're trying to really instill the running game, I don't think they're going to run it up on their buddies. I mean, they said they wanted to get Jaden Denegal in the game. They want to get Alex Orji in the game. I mean, they are trying. This is the last time before Big Ten play. We're going to see some second stringers, third stringers in the game earlier. They win with no problems, but they do not cover the spread.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's a good point to make that, again, there's some connections across the field there. I mean, they're not going to want to run up the score here. And, I also think that, like you said, they'll probably try to get some of the second and third stringers in even earlier, against the team that they're expected to clobber. So, 40.5 points is a lot too. I mean, it just, when they haven't even scored 40 yet. So I'm just going to go with, Bowling Green here. Yeah.
Well, that makes three of us. Yeah, that makes three of us. I'm also picking Bowling Green. I did the same thing as Tony, picked Michigan both the first 2 weeks. They have yet to score more than 40 points, and this one is at 41. You guys made all the points, and so I'm going to roll with Bowling Green here as well. Now watch, all of us have picked against Michigan, and they're probably going to go out and absolutely roll them, foot to the metal. But the last thing you said, Tony, as well, is kind of true about getting those guys in. I wouldn't be surprised if McCarthy doesn't see as much action as he maybe did in the first 2 games. Last opportunity to kind of get that backup quarterback position ironed out here before Big Ten play. Of course, based on how Michigan's performed the last few years, it wouldn't be shocking if they had some blowouts in Big Ten play either. So who knows? But we all are rolling with Bowling Green in this one. So the big one that everyone's going to have their eyes on across the country this weekend, and not necessarily because of the football, is Michigan State hosting Washington, who gave Michigan State quite a few troubles last year on the West Coast. Now they come over here to the Midwest with all kinds of outside circumstances. Obviously, as everyone listening to this knows, probably, Mel Tucker currently suspended. Harlan Barnett filling in for the Spartans with coach Mark D'Antonio on the sidelines as well, returning. So, Reiner, we'll start with you this time. How do you expect this one to go down?
Yeah, I think MSU is going to be obviously extremely motivated. I mean, Harlan Barnett is very well liked within that program, and I think the players are going to respond well to him. And also, I mean, who knows? I mean, maybe with D'Antonio being back, they could do some more things from a defensive back standpoint, which obviously is a big thing against Penix and Washington. Again, D'Antonio is more of a press man guy. Really tried to challenge and reroute receivers. I think that's important against Washington. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that necessarily, but maybe there's more of an emphasis on that this week, and we'll actually get to see that. Plus, the fact that, again, I would say my one, I guess, counter argument to that is that, Penix really did well against D'Antonio's team in 2019. And so that makes me a little bit hesitant to pick MSU in this. But I just think, given the circumstances and everything, the fact that Washington's having to come all the way across country to play this game, I'm going to go with MSU in this one.
I see both of those points that you made, your original point and your counterpoint to your own point, Reiner. I see it all, because last year, Washington just it was like there was no defense on the field for Michigan State. They were they were playing 10 yards off, anything underneath they wanted. And yet somehow the point of playing off coverage is so you're not beat deep. Yet time after time, there were Huskies receivers streaking down the field. It was the beginning of the end for last season for MSU. And you wrote a good piece about it on Freep.com. Just over the last year, what has happened to Michigan State. However, it has seen precipitous falls before and then bounced back. It never got to that upper echelon again. However, who better to have if you're Michigan State around than, not just Harlan, who's been there, but Mark D'Antonio. I think we were talking offline. Andrew might have used the word fairy dust, or I don't know what it is. There is something about Mark D'Antonio when everything is counted against him and there is no possible way he can do it. That's exactly when he does it. So I am picking Michigan State to cover. I see this as either a 3-point game in the fourth quarter or Washington's winning by 40, right? Like I don't see it as any other way than really tight or just a blowout from Washington. But after this week, Michigan State's going to have real trouble, right? Like you can only ride hype and momentum. You can only emotionally get up so many times. One of those has to be Michigan, maybe a Penn State, maybe an Ohio State. Like eventually you run out. So they'll get this one, but not the win. They'll cover. But after this,
yeah. Well, let me be clear: they're covering. I'm not picking them to win.
we got that.
I alarmingly, once again, agree with you guys as well. So that's 6 picks, 6 agreements here so far. We hate to see it. We like when we did. It's more fun when we all disagree. But hey, if it is what it is. All the reasons you guys said. Mark D'Antonio returning, the energy. This is like a pro. It's like kind of like a cliche coach speak, but this is a program game here. And for all the crap that went on for Michigan State this week, I think they actually kind of settled the coaching situation for the short term better than I thought they'd be able to. Because you look at the coordinators, you have Jay Johnson and Scotty Hazelton. Neither of them have any head coaching experience or at this level, especially. So I thought, all things considered, you get a guy who was kind of on the track a long time ago in Harlan Barnett. You bring back D'Antonio. It's a huge game, by far the biggest game of the non-conference schedule. I think, like you guys said, they're going to get up for this one. Now, the only thing I will disagree with you guys on is, next week they could be in trouble if they somehow find a way to win this game. We're all picking them to cover. Well, if they somehow win the game, then I could see a little more momentum carrying over to the next week, because now
who is week 4? Who is week 4?
Maryland
at home.
Maryland is at home. Yeah,
it is at home. Okay. Oh, that's a win.
And then you beat Maryland. Then
that's a winnable.
I could
game.
see that carrying on a little bit more than you said.
You
but
just say 4-0.
I said if they beat Washington, I think it carries over a little bit more than you might anticipate.
Maybe, but again, under the practical circumstances, we have to see MSU actually play solid passing defense, and if they can't do it against Washington, I'm really skeptical they'll be able to do it against Maryland.
You made a great point earlier, Reiner, about the fact that even when it was D'Antonio against Penix at Indiana, he had no answer, right? Mm-hmm. You've seen Purdue do it to Michigan State over the years, Northwestern, Indiana, those. It was never the downfield teams that are challenging these solid receivers. It was using the short passing game as a running game. Right, that always sliced and diced Michigan under D'Antonio when he would run the quarters, press, 4-man coverage, all that stuff. And I don't know if Michigan State has the horses to try that coverage in 5 days' time against against a scheme with Kalen DeBoer and Penix and some talented wide receivers on the outside.
I agree, and I don't anticipate them. Sorry, Ronald, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I don't anticipate them reinventing themselves completely, but I will say I've watched all the Michigan games, all Michigan State games, because I'm not going to the games. I'm just watching them on the couch. So I've gotten to see both games pretty thoroughly. I seriously do think this is a different Michigan State defense, better than last year's defense, at least. I watched back the Western Michigan game a few weeks before the season. That game, it ended up being like 35-13, I think was the final in 2022. Yeah. But Western had a couple turnovers. They were moving the ball. And then, there were signs that defense wasn't any good. And so far, the Michigan State, especially on that D line, and some of the guys they've added to the secondary are looking a little bit better. So I think my bigger question is with Noah Kim and the offense, and can they piece together that first half start? Because there's just they haven't proven that they can get that start that they'll need, and they'll need to have the horses going this entire game to have a chance.
I mean, I watched the CMU and Richmond games, and the quarterbacks on both teams are very limited, particularly obviously Bird Emanuel Jr. I mean, again, it's not anything close to what they're going to face with Penix, and
of course,
and honestly with Talia, and Tagovailoa the next week. I mean, it's like you're going from like two, really lower level kind of QBs at the college level to some superstar level type players. I mean, at the college level, I mean, it's like going from like basic beginner level to Madden level.
Yeah, I mean, sitting that last year's defense couldn't have stopped those guys based on what we saw. The sag-off 10-yard defense was so flawed, and it seems like they're at least different than it was last year.
Well, my last point before we go to our final game. Sitting next to Reiner and watching and listening to just his disgust and it's a level of quarterbacking that we've seen, on the opposite sideline has been one of the favorite parts of my Saturday.
Is it sort of like watching the Manning broadcast when one of the quarterbacks makes a bad play and then Peyton puts his hands on his head? He's no, what are you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's take a look at the final game we've got here. Florida and Tennessee. So Florida is a 6.5-point underdog. Tennessee obviously was a bit of an offensive juggernaut last year, but still a lot to be seen between these two teams. Probably the biggest test was Utah and Florida. So, Tony, what do you got in this one?
I mean, I don't feel great about it, but at home, I think everybody's very jaded by what Florida did week 1 at Utah. We all love to overreact. They had their own night. They had their own primetime game. They got trounced on the scoreboard. They had a bunch of weird, fluky things, some turnovers, some weird stuff. I'm not going to act like I saw a snap or whatever they did again. McNeese, Tech State, A&M University, whatever the hell, last week. But I mean, they got Graham Mertz, who from Wisconsin, who is a experienced quarterback. I don't know. I'm trying to sell it. I'm trying to talk myself into it. I like the points. I like teams in juicy spots at home who get points. So I'm taking Florida with the points. That's all I got.
I mean, I think, as far as Tennessee is concerned, I mean, I'm not overly sold on them going down to the swamp and just, absolutely kicking their butt. But, I think, a touchdown is, reasonable to assume that they can pull that out, given that they are, I think, a far better team than Florida at this point. I do have some reservations about Joe Milton. Again, this is a battle of Big Ten retreads, at the QB spot. And, Joe Milton is really, I think he's an inconsistent player, and I worry about his performance on the road at times. And so it's a little different than you're coming in, for Hendon Hooker when this time you're the guy and you're supposed to get it done. This is you're seen as your last shot. So yeah, I still have some hesitancy with Tennessee, but I just think that they're a much better team. And I was not impressed with Florida. Don't forget Utah was missing their quarterback. I'll take Tennessee, but again, overall, I actually think the SEC is pretty down this year. I mean, if you look at their performance against Power 5 in non-conference games, they're getting beat pretty badly. I think they're 3-6 against other Power 5 conferences. So that's not terrible.
Texas hammering Alabama, Florida State hammering LSU.
Miami,
the two marquee games in there.
Yeah, Miami A&M. Yeah, I mean it's not been great, and again, Auburn could barely survive.
You love to see it. God, you love to see it, man. I'm not even gonna pretend.
Yeah,
that is just fantastic.
Well, let's wait to see what Georgia does. I mean, before we off the SEC.
That's enough. That's enough. I'm not waiting for that. All right, Andy, you're up.
Georgia, I'm pretty sure, could have their backups win like 11 of their 12 games this year. Their schedule.
Yeah, have you seen that? Good point.
Well, but that's the other reason. Again, the SEC is down, so I would assume Georgia is going to just march right through there.
Yeah. Like you said, SEC has not looked great so far, particularly in that marquee game of Utah and Florida. And Tony, like you said, it did make me think for a second about that Florida Utah game, first game of this year. A lot of weird things happened, and maybe that's holding up too much space in our brains here. But I can't get out of my brain some of the stuff I saw in that game. Florida looked like a poorly coached team. One of the game-changing penalties was when they had two guys wearing the same number on the field. Gave them an automatic first down. Utah went down and scored, won the game with these. Utah had their backup quarterback, and the next week looked like a mess and barely beat Baylor, who is not. That was
that was the easiest spot. Just for the record, they escaped. Oh, Utah should have lost that game 50 ways over.
So exactly. So Utah is not some powerhouse, and Florida looked like it. I mean, it was on the road, so you got to give them the benefit of the doubt there. But Florida looked like a poorly coached team in that game, and now they have one of the biggest games of the entire SEC East season, and I can't see them. And if I was putting money on it, there's no way I'd want to put it on Florida after what I saw. Certain things will stick with you, and sometimes they should. And I think that two guys wearing the same number. What great coach do you know would allow that to happen? Bill Belichick, Nick Saban, Jim Harbaugh. Is that happening to any of their teams? That's never once going to happen. And if it is, someone's getting fired.
It's a bad look, but it's a week one thing, like, right? I mean, you're still learning.
It's more inexcusable because they have like an incredible amount of support staff at Florida. I mean, they've got analysts, for analysts. I mean, it's like ridiculous. I mean, that should never happen. And I agree with Andrew. They did look like a poorly coached team, and I think that was the biggest takeaway from that. Whereas with Tennessee, Josh Heupel has never looked like in fact, everybody says that he schemes up things to their advantage to such a great degree. I mean, he's proven to be a great coach, and I mean, again, this is where coaching could really be the difference in there. I mean, I'm not going to bank on the quarterback being the difference because I mean, I'm dubious about Joe Milton. And have been since 2020 at Michigan. But I'm going to go with the coaching in this. I think Andrew makes a great point there.
It is a good point. And getting into the business of defending Florida is not good business. It's not the one I want to be in. However, there is a difference between going to the altitude on an early weeknight game in front of 50,000 Mormons versus playing in the swamp and making it a hellscape for your opponent. So I'm just saying.
Also, if this is
at Rocky Top, I mean, no chance. But crazier things have happened in the swamp.
No, crazier things have happened, but the 6.5 just doesn't scare me that much either. 6.5, they win by a touchdown. Okay, yeah, I can see them doing that, even if they don't play that well. So that's why I'm going with that.
Hey, I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again, but we're going to find out on Saturday, as this should be the final, not terribly exciting slate. After this, I mean, we were looking for games to pick, right? For this week, we were thinking about South Carolina, Georgia. I vetoed that. Penn State, Illinois, we considered. But next week, much better slate, and for the rest of the year to come. So next time you hear us, Michigan will be 3-0. They will have just beat Bowling Green. I feel very confident in saying that, and we'll be looking ahead to Rutgers. So thank you for listening so far. I believe we still have a 5-star rating from what I've seen on Apple Pods, so that's great. If you could please continue to rate, review, subscribe, super helpful to us. And it's a good way to say thank you to the people who we need to thank every time for making this possible. Executive editor Anjanette Delgado, our editor-in-chief Nicole Avery Nichols, sports editor Kirkland Crawford, audio engineer Robin Chan, Andrew, Reiner, me, you, the world. We appreciate your time. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week. This was Hail Yes.